pre-Thanksgiving 420 days and nights special to some different states that just legalized and what their laws are about. Also with us tonight are Gary Mittin, who is a great real estate agent and is able to and successfully finds cannabis zone properties all the time, who we work with. My partner, Margolin Lawrence, who looks kind of like in shadows there, kind of mysterious, but that's a good one. Jeremy Salvadour, who is a really great accountant that we work with all the time. He's a forensic accountant. He does a lot of cannabis work, but he also does everything from cannabis to family law. That's how we met him, was through a family law connection, my mom. But he does valuations for cannabis, as well as he's going to discuss different tax considerations and different activities from delivery through manufacturing cultivation. Howard, who's in charge of our IT. Jeremy's assistant. What was your name again?
Oh, Jessica Jeffers.
Jessica Jeffers, who's going to be here assisting, and our policy analyst, Olivia Hartman, who helped design our presentation tonight and then may jump in. And it's nice to see everyone here. Amir started a chat here saying stoner style. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Since he may be a stoner, I assume that's a good thing. But we did start within 1 minute of our designated start time. So here we go. Howard's going to be sharing the screen.
No, you can share the screen now. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Howard. Okay, so everyone, all the things that we're going to be presenting, we already have up on our website. So you don't have to write things down if you don't want to, and you'll be able to go back to the website, see this presentation, and also all of our posts. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And then Howard, please make it that Jeremy and Gary can share their screen as well, and Raza, if they want to.
They should be able to.
Okay, great. And if anybody in the audience wants to share their screen at some point and become a host, I think that would make it more fun, but we haven't gotten that far yet. So but we'll see what happens tonight.
Yeah, I have some PowerPoints to share.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. All right, so. Oh. Can everybody see this? Cannabis wins the 2020 election?
Yes.
Okay, great. So basically in addition to the Democrats winning, it seems like now finally, actually tonight we have some news which is actually very good for the cannabis industry too, that the transition is officially beginning and that now the transition people are releasing some information. And that's very good for the cannabis industry because in the last 6 months, the House Democrats have proposed cannabis banking in the last 3 PPP bills. And for anybody who doesn't know, the PPP was the Paycheck Protection Program, which allowed small businesses to basically get grants to operate when they had problems from COVID and saved a lot of businesses. But unfortunately didn't have any cannabis provisions. And as everyone who's probably here knows, there's limited to zero cannabis banking. So the House Democrats had actually proposed this PPP in the last 3 PPP bills. And if we win the Senate, or even if we just win one more vote in Georgia, we meaning the Democrats, I don't mean everyone here is a Democrat, I'm just like if the Democrats do, then the Senate will be Democrat, the presidency. And there's a very good chance that we're going to pass banking for cannabis. And there's also a decent chance, I think, that the MORE Act will pass, which is the federal legalization bill. But in addition to the potential federal legalization and banking that I hope will be on the horizon, there is many cities and counties in California that have passed legalization. And what that means, though, is most places pass tax initiatives that will allow the cities and or counties or state to then go on and pass licensing bills. So that means, like, for example, Ventura, which we'll talk about later, they passed a tax initiative. So now the city council is able to go and propose licensing, which they're about to do. So many states, several states have kind of become cannabis states in this election, including Arizona, Montana, New Jersey. And we'll get into kind of what that means later. New Jersey, they're still fighting over what that's going to look like. And the other states will be the same thing because in all these places now they have the authority to do licensing, but now the legislatures have to figure out what that looks like. And the same debates that went on here are going on in other places. Like right now in New Jersey, the debate is going to be over who gets to have control of the money for social equity and what is social equity going to look like. And you'll notice that in a lot of the southern states where legalization is passed to some degree, have now, we're gonna have in New Jersey or like we have here in California. So even though we have a lot of problems in ours, there's a lot of states like Georgia, for example, where there's limited legalization. There's like they legalized a very small THC oil, and everyone else gets 10 years to life. So even though our social equity program has a lot of issues and there was even corruption in the last round, we can at least fix it. Whereas in some states there was nothing. And there's in our state law we have expungements for, in addition to licensing, it came with expungements for all cannabis felonies, other than a very select few, as well as dismissals for a lot of old cannabis felonies. So in addition to the states I just mentioned, there were a bunch of cities in California where cannabis passed, and some include Artesia, Banning, Costa Mesa, Grass Valley, La Habra. La Habra being one of the few that passed a licensing mechanism, meaning like their initiative was about how many licenses there will be. La Habra, there's going to have 4 delivery services, which, you know, it would probably be more advisable to get a delivery service somewhere where there's more opportunity, unless you have a La Habra connection. Speaking of delivery services, I wanted to also discuss that in brief, and we'll post some more to our website about that. Last week, there was a ruling that there's been kind of a lot of, firestorm about, and I just wanted to kind of clarify that regarding delivery services. First of all, the ruling was from a Fresno Superior Court, and a Superior Court doesn't have any precedential authority. So, turn off the radio, sorry. So, first of all, the decision doesn't have any ability to be precedent for other cases. It may be persuasive to other courts, but it's not going to actually have the power of stare decisis, which is the power, meaning that something that's already been decided will apply to other cases. So that case was number 1 from a Superior Court. Number 2, it only dealt with whether or not really the cities had standing to even bring this suit, which they said they didn't because there wasn't a direct conflict. But that's pretty much the whole story. Nothing has changed in the law. The state still allows in every jurisdiction people the ability to deliver if they have a delivery license in a licensed jurisdiction. And that Superior Court thinks that cities can prosecute, but like I said, that doesn't actually change the status of the law. Okay, some other places. And we can obviously, if anybody has any further questions, we can discuss it in the chat, and we'll put the order from the Fresno judge on our website. Lemon Grove, Madera, Marysville, Oceanside, Ojai, Porterville, San Bruno, Vacaville, and Ventura. And Ventura is actually, we're going to talk about that later, and we have it on one of our slides. They passed a tax initiative, but the city council is about to do a licensing bill, but it's for everything but cultivation, basically, distribution, manufacturing, and I believe they're going to do delivery. So we'll check on that, but definitely they're not going to do any cultivation. And one of the reasons may be because they've actually legalized hemp cultivation in Ventura. And generally speaking, I don't see many places that have legalized both. I'm not sure if that's, especially in an agricultural area, which may be because I have to go back and look at the legislative history, but there is definitely an issue if you're growing hemp next to cannabis, that there could be a cross pollination. And anybody on this chat here who grows can maybe give us a little more insight into that. And so you guys can see the article here on my share screen that Raza wrote about this. And then we can also jump into our slides here.
And I can just get a little bit of an overview of this, what's going on in LA. First of all, everything's kind of been on hold over the past year in LA. It's been really frustrating to a lot of people trying to get licenses. Basically, September of 2019, people applied for dispensary licenses in round 1 in LA. And then everything has been on hold since then. There was an audit of the LA system, allegations of improprieties that were going on in that system. The elections kind of slowed everything up. The COVID lockdown, the Los Angeles Department of Cannabis shut down.
Wait, Raza, one question. But look at this. I know the COVID lockdown, we have all this dreary news, but can you just look at the slide here we got today from this article in, I think it was in Marijuana Moment here. It does say that there's been an increase in cannabis consumption to deal with that, with the pandemic, which I guess.
Yeah, and that's the great thing is it's been an essential business across the state. So cannabis.
No, but also people are using it.
Exactly. So the market's growing, and now they're finally giving out new licenses. It's starting to open up in LA and all across the state and across the country. So really, there's all
Sure.
these opportunities right now. In LA, there's opportunities now to buy and sell licenses and to relocate them around the city. So there's really a whole lot of kind of action opening up and new opportunities. With the election, that's changing things too. No one knows exactly what's going to happen at the federal level. Biden said he's going to move it to Schedule 2, which would put it into the same schedule as Oxycontin, but a lot of people are doubtful that he's going to be successful in that, but that's his announced goal. But we'll see. Kamala Harris has said that she's more open to more liberal legalization. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes.
Explain the difference between Schedule 2 and descheduling, just since you're like on the subject, and also the MORE Act would deschedule, isn't that right? Which is the federal proposal.
Yeah, there's these schedules depending on supposedly how harmful a drug is and whether it has any medical benefits. And cannabis has been for a long time Schedule 1, the strictest category, means that there's no medical benefit and high potential for abuse. And what Biden's proposal is to move it down to Schedule 2, which is like the most dangerous types of prescription drugs. If that were the case, the FDA would essentially take over and you could only sell it through FDA approved drugs. What's been happening so far though is the feds have just had a hands-off approach, and you've seen all of these regulations at the state level pop up, and more states are putting in place these state level licensing, and now we have new ones from this election. So the MORE Act, the proposal is to deschedule, take it off the federal schedules and just leave it to the states to regulate. And a lot of people think that's going to happen, but Biden's kind of a wild card on this issue. And we'll just have to see how it shakes out. But more and more people of both parties have been coming out in favor of this. And a lot of people think it's just a matter of time before it's legalized at the federal level. And if you can get your state level business started now, then when it goes federal, you can go nationwide and hopefully turn it into a really huge company.
Now, Roz, I'm just showing what was one of the DCR slides presented on Thursday. Can you just tell us, going from kind of the macros to the micro scene? I think this is probably the most relevant. Tell us a little bit about, and if Jenna, if you want to jump in, and you can share your screen too, Jenna, about the forms relating to this.
We'll see a lot of this is coming up now for the LA licenses for the non-retail cultivation, distribution, manufacturing. There's people who have had those since 2018 when they applied, sort of legacy operators who are supplying the pre-ICOs. And now finally you're allowed to move those around the city. You're allowed to put them under different companies to have new owners. So it's kind of opened up the market for these licenses in LA. You can also apply for brand new distribution licenses and non-volatile manufacturing licenses, which the general public can apply for in LA. You don't have to be a social equity applicant. And then the other new piece is you can apply for delivery licenses. You have to be a social equity applicant for that. Then you also have the new storefront licenses going forward in LA. It's a little complicated. There's the undue concentration process, the lottery, different phases, but that's all finally moving forward. So whatever you're interested in, if you want to do it in LA, things are kind of moving forward, and finally people are able to get rolling on these licenses.
So Roz, tell us a little bit. Okay, so basically, when you guys can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So when I asked you, like, we were going over this today, and I said, do you think there's really anything new going on? You said, not particularly with the PCN process, although there's a couple slides on it. But basically, with the PCN, like always, in order to get PCN approved, you have to show that it's in the public convenience and necessity of the neighborhood. And in order to do that, you need to get basically an approval from some of the stakeholders in the area. So that's something that we help with. That's, at least that's something that you can, by knowing like which areas may, what the density of the dispensaries are, knowing which city council people may or may not be more open to having dispensaries and those kinds of things. You can try to help map your PCN application. But there's really nothing more definitive than what's already been shown.
But basically, if you want to go through this process, you have to go through your local neighborhood council, your city council office, and kind of get the approvals of the community groups around. It sort of involves lobbying and putting together an attractive package that you think people are going to like. But it's one way of getting a dispensary license. The other way is to go through this lottery system for the non-PCN areas. But however you want to do it, you got to go through a social equity applicant in the city of LA.
terms of some deadlines, this is important. So for PCN, the people who already submitted, which was like basically before they took it off the website, which were 69 people or 69 entities, we get, for those people by December 1st, we can file a completed PCN request form. So if you have, if you're one of those 69 and you haven't already reached out to the stakeholders in your community, please do, or hire us to help you do that. And we should get going, or you should get going if you haven't already. It says the DCR is currently not accepting new PCN requests. That's just a temporary until the early 2021. So if you are submitting for a PCN, you should already be talking to the stakeholders in your area, whether you're the 69 or you're the new ones. And that's what it says here. There are only 6 areas of undue concentration still, even though for a period of time the DCR allowed for more. And maybe this will bring us to Gary here. You can tell us, how do you look? So for example, there's undue concentration areas, Sun Valley, Sherman Oaks, these areas that are in the slide. But Gary, can you tell us, like, how do you look for a property that's good for any of these things, retail, delivery?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me join the webinar. What I do is I rely on a memorandum, which I had emailed to you, if you can put up on the board, from December of 2017. This is kind of like the holy grail for how I look at properties. What it did was it segmented the different types of activity that the local authority allows. So retail, non-storefront is C1 through C1, well, actually all the C's through C5, CM, which is flex space, and then the M1, M2, M3 industrial buildings. So if you're looking for delivery, I actually just sent out my first letter of intent on a delivery space for one of my clients. And it's important that they fall into the category that will get approval. But the step is that you, as part of this new process, you have to send like a letter, basically, that the landlord is going to be allowing you to use that space for that usage. Whether it's the landlord attestation that's being used in the relocations, I don't know. That one has to be notarized. I would assume it would have to be notarized as well. But, and the second page has those different types. It's down towards, yeah, right there. Goes through all the different types. So getting back to delivery falls into the C categories and the CM and the M categories. The manufacturing in LA is a type 6. So that's in the MR2, M2, and M3 zones. Distribution, MR1, M1, MR2, M2, and M3. And then they also do allowed testing as part of that negotiation with the ordinance change. So everyone received the choice of either delivery through social equity, or they could opt for type 6, which is manufacturing, type 11, which is distribution, not having to go through social equity to apply. And I've got locations. So that's all.
So maybe Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit about, you can hear me, right? Yeah. Jeremy, if you could tell us a little bit about some things that I think would be interesting for given what we're discussing tonight. What is the accounting / taxation for differences between, first of all, storefront, for retail storefront delivery, and then distribution, you know, on the one hand, those kind of, versus cultivation and manufacturing, because these might be important things for people to consider when they're considering what activities to do.
Well, so why don't I preface this by indicating that we have a cannabis management advisory services division for accounting and management services in my firm, which we've expanded to 8 professionals. And one of our key folks on taxation is Jessica Jeffress here as one of the panelists. So I'm going to give her some exposure. And Jessica, why don't you explain a little bit? I'll chime in when I think there's some pertinent points I should add.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right here. I have a PowerPoint slide. Can you guys all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is going to give you a little bit of overview with taxes and who's responsible for what. So you've got a cultivator, you could establish yourself as a manufacturer, a distributor, or a retailer, or even a micro business. So let's start with the cultivator. That's where ultimately where it begins. So the only tax that the cultivator is responsible for is the cultivation tax upon growing it. And they are responsible to pay the tax, but they do not remit it to the tax authority, which is the CDTFA. Then you have the manufacturer, and they are responsible to collect the tax, but the actual person that gives it is the distributor. So if you see the distributor right here, they have a lot of X's, a lot of things that they're responsible for. They are responsible to collect the tax from the cultivator or from the manufacturer if it goes from cultivator to manufacturer to distributor. And then they're going to remit that to the CDTFA. And then they also are responsible for collecting and remitting the excise tax to the CDTFA as well. So if you're a cultivator, you only owe cultivation tax. If you're a retailer, you only owe excise tax. The distributor has to both collect and remit and do the returns for the cultivation and the excise tax. Over here, if you're a retailer in this column, you're going to pay and collect the sales tax from your client. You're going to get taxed on anything that's cannabis related, and you're going to pay that. Usually they'll charge sales tax on top of the excise tax already being included. So the total amount that's due plus the excise tax, and then a sales tax rate on top of that. And they're going to collect that and give that to the distributor to give to the CDTFA.
Will you also, when you go through this, can you also discuss with us the federal income tax issues?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Let me see if I can share my other screen that has more PowerPoints related to that.
Because I want to see for that, because like one thing that people talk about is like delivery versus storefront, and they always want to do storefront, which maybe that's the right decision. That may be the right thing, but I know that there's very little deductions for retail in general. So it's just something to consider.
Yeah.
You know, like what the overhead is. And but I know that there are some things that are considered cost of goods, like the actual cannabis, and I think that's deductible. So those are the kinds of things, if you guys can give us a little kind of summary on that, those are the kind of particulars I know that everyone's interested, including, I always like need a refresher.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
let me just go over the rest of the excise real briefly here. I don't know if you can see this slide right here. So excise tax on sale. So this is the retailer that's responsible for this, and usually they'll include it and charge it to the customer. So they're able to collect that. So say Snoop Dogg buys marijuana at a retail outlet and he pays $100. He's going to pay the excise tax, which is 15% of that markup cost. And then, so that would be 115. And then he's going to pay sales tax on top of that 115 that already includes the excise tax. So say the sales rate in his district is 9%, then his sales tax is charged on that, and that gets added. So his total cost, it normally would have been 105, but then after the excise tax and the sales tax, it's 125. So that's how the excise works. Now here's how cultivation tax is calculated is on 3 different categories: marijuana flowers, leaves, and plants. So this is for the flowers. The rate is adjusted for inflation every year. The rate currently, you can always check the CDTFA website for the updates, but as of right now, it's $9.65 per dry ounce. That's the dried flowers of the plant. And then the leaves, the rate, it's a lot less on the leaves. It's only $2.87 per dry ounce. These are defined as all parts of the plant other than marijuana flowers. And then last but not least, they also tax on the 3rd category, which is fresh cannabis plant. And that's, it has to be weighed within 2 hours of harvesting to qualify for fresh plant category. And that is the cheapest tax rate at $1.35 per ounce. And cultivation, they may adjust it annually for inflation. They could establish other categories. I recently spoke with the CDTFA how to categorize kief, which is the remnants that fall from the plant, and they said since it's not attached to the flower anymore, that would be qualified as leaf. Also for pre-rolled joints, it depends on what's getting rolled into the joint as to whether it's being taxed as leaf or as flower. Let's go down. You wanted to know about the income taxes. Do you guys have any questions on excise or cultivation tax before I go into the income tax? Nope. Okay. Okay, so for federal income tax,
But tell us again about Keef. What was that again? Repeat that one because that's interesting. I just want to hear that again.
oh, okay, Keef is
The Keef tax. The Keef tax.
the how the tax works.
Yeah.
Keef is it's defined as the crystal that falls off, like off of the plant. It's not really attached, and because it's not part of the flower, they said that it can be considered leaf and be taxed at the lower leaf rate.
Yeah, which is, by the way, which is really great, because if those of you who know the anatomy of a cannabis plant, you know that that keef is essentially the crystallized trichomes that fall off of the plant, and your content of THC is going to have a very high concentration. And so to have keef taxed at a low rate is actually quite beneficial.
Correct.
And Anthony's asking, did you say keef or leaf? Both.
Oh.
She said both. So keef again is that term that's used for the resinous trichomes that fall off the flower, and it can be taxed under the leaf excise tax structure.
Yeah, it sounds like leaf, but it's spelled K-I-E-F, keef.
Yeah, so Anthony, it sounds like you're probably more attuned to cultivation. So the trichomes is exactly right. So when they're harvesting and those trichomes fall off during the harvest, or essentially they start to accumulate, they can be valuable, but as you know, the trichome concentration in most leaves is going to be very low, but the trichome concentration in keef is very high. And so if you were looking at the best way to tax cannabis, it's actually through keef, because you can make a colorable argument that the keef, while very high in THC concentration and valuable, can be taxed at the leaf tax rate.
And another option is with pre-rolls, if you want to be taxed lower. I asked the CDTFA and they said that the pre-roll, the tax rate all depends on what's in that pre-roll. So if you want to get a lower tax rate, if you roll the leaves and there's no flower in the pre-roll, then it can be taxed at the lower leaf rate. Whereas if there's flower in any part of that pre-roll, then it would be considered flower and be taxed at the higher rate.
Jessica, why don't we move into the federal income tax component of it? Those of you who know or have been in cannabis, probably the biggest issue associated with it is the federal income taxation component, which is known as IRC Code 280E. And that essentially was a result of the Edmonton case in 1981, which was a case where a small-time drug dealer who dealt in cocaine, methamphetamines, and marijuana was charged for drug possession and illegal drug sales, in which case, back then, he made an argument to deduct from his illegal business the cost of various things, including a small scale, packaging expenses, telephone expenses, and automobile expenses. In that case, he was actually quite articulate in making his claims, and the trial court found him to be persuasive and allowed him to deduct all of those things, with the exception of a few things that they cut down. Now, that was a landmark case because in 1981, it essentially led to IRC Code 280E. And under Code 280E, Congress enacted that as a essentially reversing the Edmonton case as it related to deductions. And 280E, as it's written, says that no deduction shall be taken for businesses that traffic in controlled substances within the meaning of Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So 280E, as it stands, actually doesn't allow for any deductions. Later on, there was a memorandum that was issued, and in order to avoid Supreme Court issues related to property, they essentially allowed for the deduction of cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold. The argument was that property going out as an expenditure of cost of goods sold, then coming back, was merely a return of property and therefore should not be taxed. And essentially that argument prevailed, and we have what we have now is a memorandum from the IRS Chief Counsel memo, and that memo indicates that cost of goods sold under 280E is deductible. However, it is still restricted to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. This will remain an issue if the presidential administration does reschedule to Schedule 2, or another solution would be to recodify or rewrite 280E. Now, having said all of that, 280E stands today as probably one of the most egregious tax codes known to the cannabis industry, because it essentially creates an effective tax rate based on anecdotal evidence, because we've got a lot of cannabis clients, of about 90% if no tax mitigation structures or strategies are put into play. One of the issues that we contend with is this idea of what is cost of goods sold. And I think, Allison, you asked this question: what is cost of goods sold with regard to the supply chain? And we showed you that supply chain starting from cultivator, manufacturer, distributor, subsequently to retailer. That definition is unique for those respective areas of the supply chain. And under the code section, there has been, IRS Chief Counsel has issued a memo that indicates that IRC Code 471 should be used in defining what is cost of goods sold, and those things that would be included as inventoriable costs and therefore deductible under 280E. Now, I'm using a lot of terminology here, but it essentially says, look at this code section, because that's going to tell you what you can deduct for purposes of a cannabis company.
How about, so can we go through some like particular items? Let's say like payroll, can that ever be deductible for any type of cannabis company?
The
and
answer,
then if so, give us some examples.
yeah, so the answer is yes. The answer is yes, but let me give you a distinguishment and lay some foundation. Under IRC Code 61, there are distinctions with different types of businesses. Those distinctions are either the business is going to be a producer or a reseller. That is a producer or a reseller.
Jeremy, we have one of the audience members asked if we could. Yeah, and also he said
page 52.
THC try. Yeah, he said someone asked.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
And
then wanted to take a picture of page 52.
Okay.
52.
This one?
Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, so what you're looking at
Yeah.
on page 52 is essentially an example of how 280E would affect a non-cannabis business versus a cannabis business. And you can see that what you'll find there is the only thing that's deductible is the cost of goods sold, therefore leaving all other deductible selling, general, and administrative expenses as non-deductible. If those things are non-deductible, it takes it away from deductible expenses. Your taxable income exceeds the income generated by the business, and your effective tax rate skyrockets as a result. All right? So that's what that chart is showing you.
So what's in that? So in terms of tax, like, so you're saying like this year, that's like, what are some examples? Like we were just talking about like payroll, for example.
So
For, let's say, a retail
would
business,
fall
is
under
that? You're gonna
selling,
tell us? Okay.
general, and administrative expenses would not be non-deductible. Let me give you a few examples.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
so marketing expenses, non-deductible. Advertising expenses, non-deductible. If you deal with administrative salaries and executive salaries, non-deductible. Insurances, typically non-deductible. Now, there are a few ways to get them deductible, and we'll go through some of them here, okay? And I don't by any means want to establish an exhaustive set of strategies here, because when we're working with our clients, sometimes it takes weeks to get all of this stuff in place so that we can make sure that they're essentially availing of the tax structures that are in place to maximize their cost of goods sold. So let me.
Hey, Jeremy, can we also, just a quick thing, can we also put up all your slides after? We'll give your credit and stuff, but I'm sure people are going to want to see it later with
Sure,
your
sure.
website if it has it, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give you all these slides, and
Cool.
you can distribute them as you see fit.
Okay,
We're
cool.
happy to share these. But when we deal with this distinguishment, there are two types of businesses. There are producers and there are resellers, and the difference makes a stark contrast as to what can actually be deductible. So the producers would be the cultivators and the manufacturers, okay? And throughout the supply chain, those manufacturers then sell to a distributor. The distributor then places the product into a retailer space. The distributor and the retailer are both considered resellers. So when you look at the areas of the supply chain, it's important to know where they fall in terms of IRC code 471. And the reason is this: when you're dealing with resellers, the only things that are deductible are the cost of the product and the freight in, which essentially is part of the product cost. This leaves an egregious amount of deductions that are unavailable to resellers. However, if you deal with a producer has a different definition of what cost of goods sold would be. That definition is direct labor, direct materials, and manufacturing overhead. Those are all inventoriable costs that essentially become part of the product that is being generated or created. So whether it's a manufacturer or a cultivator, you may have substantially more deductions available to you than if you were a reseller. Let me give you some distinguishments. The manufacturing overhead associated with rent on a facility can be deductible and part of cost of goods sold if part of a producer, not so with a reseller. Okay? The cost of utilities in an indoor cultivation facility or even an outdoor cultivation facility that go directly into the product becomes deductible as a direct material. The cost of water, the cost of electricity, the cost of fertilizers, all of these are direct inputs into the product and therefore under IRC code 471 would be deductible. You asked me about payroll. Payroll may be deductible for a producer to the extent that the payroll is for a direct labor cost associated with the production of the product. So could you have line farmers, et cetera, who are going in and producing the product and have that deductible? The answer is yes, as long as you account for it properly, document it properly, and you have a distinguishment as to the value of time that's put into the product versus administrative costs. Now, could you have a supervisory staff member have a component of his salary deductible? The answer is yes, but it depends. Because if they're a supervisory line staff directly working on materials as direct labor into the production of the product, that line supervisor's salaries can be deductible to that extent.
So you're saying, but even how about for you just said for cultivation, how about, is there anything for, let's say, like a retail or distribution?
Not available for retail or distribution.
No, not a payroll can be going towards that, basically.
You can go towards payroll. It just would not be deducted.
Okay, all right.
And,
And
and so
manufacturing and cultivation are more similar. How about testing lab?
testing labs, very similar to the same type of structure as a reseller. And in this case, very often the lab itself will not have a cost of goods sold. And so what we sometimes do is generate direct materials associated with the furnishing of the service. And we deal with something else. We deal with a different type of taxing structure. We can go over some of these other types of strategies that are significantly more advanced, but allow you to avail of the 471 IRC code cost of goods deduction. So there's a plethora of them. Allison, you know, and Raza, you know, when we sit down with some of these clients, we listen to what their needs are, both from the from the position of where they are in the supply chain, but also from what requirements they have in terms of their respective shareholders or stakeholders. Now, let me give you an example. Sometimes we might say, okay, we know that you've developed copyrighted material, trademarks, branding, etc. You may consider putting that branding and trademarking into a different entity for which that trademark and branding charges a royalty fee associated with the product's manufacture or cultivation, in which case the cost of that royalty in order to produce the product would be a direct cost into the respective product and therefore includable as a deductible expense under cost of goods sold. So that's just one of the ways that we can deal with some of these things. There's very, very, very simple and elegant ways to deal with 280E, but it does require that the systems be put into place. And I often recommend that you put the systems in place at the very get-go, as opposed to trying to bandage this up later on. And it leads to, invariably leads to the ability for you to take more of those deductions because of the documentation, the routines, the structure that we can help you put into place.
And one thing is, I mentioned payroll a lot because the law is since 2018 that basically everyone that you have employed there is going to have to be an employee on payroll in most operations. I mean, like in most people in most operations. The only people who aren't payroll are like literally like a cleaning service that maybe comes in where they have many other clients, or like an outside contractor. But almost everybody else is. And one of the things I don't know if Olivia figured this out today, but I wanted to have it up tonight, is how do people pay payroll in cash? I want to put that up on the website if we don't already have it up. I don't know if you know, Jenna, but like what's the address, what's the phone number? Because that's something I think that like is presenting an issue. People have like no idea about that.
Right, right. So let me give you, I think there was a couple of things there that warrant discussion. One is this idea of the employee versus an independent contractor. And by and large, those folks who are working in these cannabis companies are very likely an employee, in the sense that tools are supplied, time cards are required, the individual is told when and how to work, etc. There are certain circumstances, Allison, where, to give you an example, if you have an outside company supplying you with staffing and labor, and there are they're becoming much more common, wherein you have certain bright lines designed here where the behavioral control is not dictated by the company, but is instead dictated by the outside provider of labor. That means to say the type of instruction given, such as when and where to work, as I indicated, what tools are used or purchased by the respective individual providing the service, the degree for which instruction is generated by the company. All of these are considerations, and the higher amount of independence, or I should say the greater amount of this type of direction that's given by an outside company as opposed to the company itself, the greater the degree that there will be that you can avail of an independent contractor. Now, there are some financial.
Jamie, could you just speak for a minute about how this works with management companies? I know these are extremely common, especially in Los Angeles, through the social equity program. And if a license holder brings in a management company to manage the operations, are those people considered employees of the management company or of the license holder, or both potentially?
So this is where things get a little bit dicey. This idea of a management company has been ubiquitous and popular in the cannabis space for years. I find that they have their place. There's a reason to put them in place, and oftentimes it's not a good way of coordinating labor, right? It's not a good way of deciding whether somebody is an employee versus a contractor. It is certainly one consideration, but if you have a management company and that management company is affiliated and that management company is essentially telling these employees what to do from a perspective that you still have the same ownership, same management, et cetera, it's very difficult. It would be very difficult to then make a independent contractor argument. However, if instead you have a management agreement that's arm's length, and that arm's length management company is not composed substantially by the same ownership interests by which the operating entity is owned by, then you may have the ability to make a more colorable argument that you have independent contractors. I mentioned behavioral control, right? We've got a number of identifiable considerations with regard to behavioral control, but there are two others. It is the relationship and financial control. So let me give you an example. If there's a significant investment in the equipment the worker uses in working for somebody else, or there is an opportunity for profit or loss, it's often an indicator of independent contractorship. If there is services available in the market for which these services can then be, there is an actual set of services in the marketplace that can be purchased or contracted under. These are all considerations, and this relationship is very important. And that I think is what you're hinging on is the type of relationship depends on how the worker and the business perceive their interactions with one another. That is to say, written contracts which describe relationships, benefits for which that individual reaps, whether they are an employee benefits versus not, such as pension plans, insurance, vacation, sick time, etc. Generally, independent contractors won't have those. But if you're rendering those to an individual and subsequently trying to make an argument that they're an independent contractor, I think you'd probably be hard pressed to do so. So there's a lot of these issues, and there are consequences for misclassifying an employee because it essentially skirts the employment taxes associated with having an employee.
And also, as part of what everyone was required to do for LA and for anything in the state with cannabis is that you had to sign this LPA labor peace agreement attestation form. And what that said is that, when you have 10 or more employees, that you'll allow a union to come in. And that's actually the biggest thing that they're going to be checking on. I think the first thing is, do you have people on payroll? So I think that's the first thing to get together. And I know that many people probably are not quite doing that yet, but you need to be doing it because that's kind of just, you guys know, in the recent election, there was their whole thing about Uber and Lyft. They were actually asking for and received an exemption from that requirement, which has been there for several years. So people even may owe back. There's even, have you guys heard commercials out there like, oh, did you work for Lyft and Uber? You could be owed back in wages. And that's because for 2 years, it's actually been the law since 2018. So if people weren't receiving payroll for those years, you may even owe them back wages. So it's important to get onto that at least now.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left. Jenna, do you want to tell us a little bit about so Jenna here is our policy analyst, and she's, I think, started 40 delivery applications in the last 2 weeks, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
and she's dealing in office with like the forms, the actual execution. Jenna, do you want to like take us maybe for the next like 10 minutes through the forms? By the way, everyone, at the end, Gohar will do a little. I'll have Gohar talk. So if you have time to talk for a few minutes after Jenna goes about how you talk to landlords, just to kind of finish up on the property edge, and we'll have Gary see a couple more things. But Jenna, you have the floor, and if you can just tell us like how do you make this initial submission, what's required, and if you can show us actual like forms that people have to submit, that would be awesome.
Yeah, okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jenna. I'm one of the policy analysts for Allison and Raza. I'll try and share my screen, which has the slides that kind of goes through like what's needed to submit your application and the forms. Let me just see if I can do this really quick. Not sure if that's showing up. But so as we kind of went over a little earlier, DCR is now accepting applications for non-retail activities, including distribution, non-volatile manufacturing, delivery, and testing. Delivery is only for persons who have been pre-qualified under the social equity program, but everything else is for, general applicants.
But one thing on that, there's actually there's a good DCR slide on it, and we can, if someone wants to, call us or email us later, we can get into more detail. But the deal is this: if you're already qualified as an applicant, you can do the PCN, you can do delivery, but for the lottery, you're going to have to get requalified, in that you're going to have a prior cannabis arrest and either be low income, as defined under the new low income rules, or have 10 years in a police reporting district. For which there has been, too many drug arrests. Of course, any drug war arrest is too many, but there have been a proliferation of drug war arrests. So there was actually, they said in the meeting on Thursday that now you can find it on the DCR licensing map, an overlay for police reporting districts, because it's been hard for people to even figure out, are they from there? So keep going, Jen. I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you. Yeah, so all the, to submit your application, the first process is a pre-application review, and all the application forms can be found on the DCR website. I've also included some links in here that will take you directly in there from our slides. The first one there is you need to list out all of your primary personnel and owners that are going to be under the application, or your corporation that you're applying the business for. That just needs, a signature from one of your majority owners. You also each owner will need to submit a owner attestation, which needs to be notarized. And you need to submit a landowner attestation from each property owner for the business location, which also needs to be notarized as well. You also need to submit either a radius map attestation, which just needs a signature, or a dated radius map showing that your location is compliant with all of the location and zoning restrictions, such as, location to a certain distance to any sensitive use sites. And you need to submit a business premises diagram and site plan showing the layout of the business. At this time, if you have an executed lease plus like a financial documentation showing that you've secured the property, you will need to show that. You can submit without it initially. However, it is recommended that you submit it at the time of you submit your initial application. Once the DCR reviews your pre-application review, they'll send you an invoice, and you'll have 10 days to pay that, and then you will move on into the temporary approval process, which is they'll go on and confirm that your zoning and location, and you'll go through some additional forms. So also at this time, the DCR has started to accept modification requests for existing licenses and applicants. So you can start submitting modifications for a business premises relocation, legal entity name change, diagram modifications, You can remove or add, remove owners or change, percentage over ownership for your business as well. And to do that, the first thing that you need to do that's recommended is to watch the video tutorial that's on the DCR website. And then you'll need to register on the link that's on the slide here with your intent to modify and submit what you're intending to modify with. The DCR will review those requests, and then if they approve that you can make those changes, then they will change your license status in your Acela portal over to additional info needed. And you can go ahead and submit the applicable forms that you need to submit in a formal request and begin those changes. So we have some slides here that show what the types of changes that you can do. Each request will need to have a modification cover page, which is the slide here, detailing the current situation and what requests that you are making, and then the applicable forms that you need to submit depending on the type of modification that you're requesting, whether it be relocating or adding or changing ownership, a phase 3 round 1, entity substitution, or like we said, ownership structure. So that's what's going on with the DCR right now. And the pre-application review is fairly straightforward, at least for the initial stages, and then we'll go from there. Everything.
Thank you, Jenna. Does anybody have any? Let's see here. I wanted to have Gohar talk a little bit about. So I do think, and also we can have Gary discuss this too. But really, of all this, for the PCN, that's a difficult thing. There's some skill involved in that. But really, the biggest thing is finding a property. And Gary talked about it. Gohar also, in addition to advising people to hire Gary, we do try to, if we find properties, we do try to call them. But as Gohar can tell you, because she's the one who generally is calling the landlords, she and Raza do, it's extremely hard to find the landlords willing to do that. That's why, having a real estate agent like Gary can help. But Gohar, tell us how you find it and how we find properties, what we do. Other than, of course, I take pictures. And this is something, so we talk to Gary. We also have this one real estate software, CoStar. And then what I do, and I recommend this, I also take pictures as I'm driving down the street of locations that look like they're 600 feet from another dispensary, or 700 feet, at least 600 feet from a school. And then Gohar calls these guys. So
by the way, just on the property too, for delivery, you really only need a tiny little office, and you can have multiple licenses on the same address.
Gary, tell us what
I was just going to say, Raza, you're absolutely right. It's about 1,000 square feet, 1,000 to 1,200 is what I'm getting requests for. Park overnight. And that normally needs to be something that's fairly secure to a certain extent, and freeway accessible. Those are the requests that I'm getting. Anything more to add to that, Raza?
No, just that there's also a lot of new properties that have opened up in recent weeks and months with the lockdown and all these businesses going under, that there's a lot of opportunities out there. Even if you found it hard a few months ago to look for places, it might be a totally different landscape in some neighborhoods now. So I would just second Allison's request of actually looking around the area physically, looking for signs, that kind of thing. But there's all kinds of opportunities everywhere if you just look hard enough.
After what you say, after Gary.
Oh, one last thought on that. One last thought on that. Roz is absolutely correct as well. Because of the COVID, we're kind of in a weird spot, because you have people that are in various units that cannot be evicted because they didn't pay rent from March through August. Then you have the September through January 31st period where they have to pay 25%. So you have a lot of owners that would love to be able to get rid of those people and fill them with people that are paying, but are kind of limited. So the other consideration is debt on the property. Many people that have any type of loans on it are very leery because they don't want the loan to be called in. So if the owner owns that outright, they're the best candidate. to be leasing. But yes, absolutely right. There's a discount with the COVID and the civil unrest and this continued quasi lockdown.
Anybody out there who has a place right now, there is what's called the LA commercial rent moratorium, and nobody can be evicted on the sole basis of post-COVID rent obligation.
Correct.
So for commercial renters until 3 months after the end of the COVID emergency, which hasn't even hasn't ended yet. So that's just because, or even 3, they can't really be, you can't be evicted for that. So it allows you to kind of hang on to things and make deals.
It is. We're all kind of nervous, though, to a certain extent, because I'm dealing with people from the first 100 that perhaps had a situation change where, you know, the rate that was quoted back in August of 2019 certainly doesn't reflect the reality we're all living in now. Very fluid situation, and a lot of folks that are relocating as part of the phase 3 round 1 that they're now out of that original space. They don't have site control and they want to go elsewhere. They're a little bit leery to sign new leases, and they don't know how long they're going to be paying for. So hopefully we'll get some great news on that as well in the new year.
Gohar, tell us what do you say? So let's say someone's doing it on their own. How do you talk to the landlords? Because you actually have some success in talking to them in our office. What do you say to them? What do you recommend when people are doing it on their own?
Yeah, Gary and Raza covered it all, but basically,
like the factors like credit, like what do the landlords want to know? Like one thing that's been hard is like for some of our clients who are social equity candidates, it's hard for them to find properties. So this is kind of the conundrum of all this stuff. Like on the one side is like the predatory behavior, on the other side are social equity applicants who, some of whom don't have like let's just say the people who have the prior marijuana arrest, many of them don't have established income histories. And that's like kind of a hard thing. Like what are the things that the landlords are asking for, Gohar? And like, what do and what do people, people end up doing like partnerships kind of because of that, but that's kind of like one of the realities. Gohar, tell us what they're asking for.
Yeah, totally. I usually come across 2 types of landlords, one that are strictly a no on all cannabis activity, and others who are usually on the fence. And the ones who are on the fence are the ones who you could really push them and persuade them to let them know that it's okay for them to rent their property to you.
Under the state law, of course, under federal law. That's still a federal law violation. At the same time as trying to get them to agree to rent to cannabis. That's kind of like the hard thing to reconcile. One thing kind of in point to that, and Gary mentioned this too, and this is also why I think that landlords are extra tough. You can't really rent to a cannabis tenant unless you own your building outright, because otherwise you're putting your loan at risk. That doesn't mean people don't commit fraud, of course, and we have like a big criminal practice, I guess, because of that. But we can't, it's not a great idea. It's not a good idea at all. You're talking about like federal offenses. So that's one thing. Like these people who own these properties, they have a lot of leverage because they're like they own these things outright, which like is a very particular type of property owner. So
correct. It's mostly your mom and pop type of owner, they're easy to deal with if they understand the process. It's the unknown. Rent. When am I going to get that cannabis rent? When's it going to be approved? How long is it going to take the state to approve it after the city approves it? It's the same question. And again, this is a new industry. We've not issued one social equity license to date. So we're all kind of still feeling our way, but we all need to be kind of ambassadors of the program and, speak good of it, because we want to be able to find buildings that we can rent. That's what it comes down to.
True. So I don't think there's any more questions. We're going to put everything up on our website. Jeremy will send us his things. Jeremy has his own accounting firm. Gary has his real estate agent. And everybody else works in our office or works for us, except for here on the right. This is really the Jessica. This is a full Brady bunch now. We have 9. Jessica works in Jeremy's office, and Jeremy, tell us your website. Maybe you can text it up here in the panelists section, where people can go and find you, and then Gary also. Guys, Jeremy, you want to tell everyone where we can find you, where people can find you if they want to hire you, and also Gary?
Yeah.
Let me just drop this into the panelists and the attendees. It's just
Oh, yeah. And Gary, you do the same, please.
www.cpa.com. And what you'll find is that we have been in the cannabis space since 2012. And just for full disclosure, we don't actively advertise that we are cannabis accountants in that sense, even though we've got a division of 8 CPAs, MBAs, professionals, etc., who are in this space. Jessica is a CPA, MBA, specializes in taxation. Wave hi, Jessica. And so we really require what's called a co-val letter to the extent that you wish to retain us. That means that before we get involved, we would require that we become the consultants of your general counsel or consultants of one of your attorneys. To that extent, our work then becomes attorney-client privilege. It helps to protect the client. It helps to protect the sort of while we have confidentiality, we do not have attorney-client privilege.
And that's, by the way, that's just as like just a small detail. There's only attorney-client privilege under state law. On Gohar, this might be on the bar. Gohar is our extern, and she's a student at Loyola. She's a second year, but there's actually something we have to require to tell a client now that under the federal law, there's no confidentiality because it's still a federal crime, and you can be unfortunate witness against a client. That's never happened, thank goodness, to us or anything or anybody I know of. But there's only state law confidentiality unless it's for purpose of litigation.
Right. Right, and to that respect, again, what we've been in this industry for quite some time, and we deal with any spectrum of clientele from, what I call legacy entrepreneurs to the entrepreneurs who are in this space today. We got involved in the cannabis space when it was prior to the regulation in the recreational space, and we were dealing with a lot of the nonprofit organizations, and having partnerships disputes associated with those got really complicated. And so we were in that space at the time. Our practice has really now shifted towards management advisory services. As you can see, we've got specialists in taxation, but for all 4 of those areas of taxation: excise tax, sales tax, California state tax, federal tax. We have folks who are familiar with mergers and acquisitions, business valuation analysts, international taxation folks, and so happy to have a strategy call with you. But again, our caveat is that you do have to have an attorney if you're going to retain us.
Gary, you wrote how people reach you here. This is on the side, guys. Gary.
Yes, GaryMittin.com. I've included my cell phone number, my email, and all inquiries. I'm here.
Well, thank you. This can be, we'll post this on our website so you can replay it and download whatever you want. So thanks so much. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Cheers.
Hi.
Cheers.
Bye.